Good evening. The parents of a 27-year-old woman from Exeter who died after a 9-year battle with chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME as it's known, have said her death was preventable.
Yes, when Maeve Boothby O'Neill died in October 2021, she was bedridden and unable to eat because she was so exhausted. In the months before her death, she'd been admitted to hospital 3 times with malnutrition.
Richard Lawrence was at the conclusion of the inquest into Maeve's death in Exeter this afternoon. Richard, what did the coroner say?
Well, the coroner has been summarising what was 6,500 pages of evidence, with witnesses, 18 in total, that gave evidence to the inquest over the past couple of weeks. And they were people that were directly involved in the final months of her care, whether it was doctors or dietitians or other support workers too. She'd been looking at what more could have been done, that principal question that the parents have been asking, and whether changes should now be put in place to involve parents and doctors more heavily when a patient like Maeve presents herself with such a severe case of ME and the symptoms that she was showing, sadly, before she deteriorated so rapidly. For 2 weeks, the parents of Maeve Boothby O'Neill have been the voice of their daughter with one question on their minds. What more could they or the medical profession have done to save her? She was academically gifted and had been looking forward to going to university, but her illness had really taken hold after her A-levels.
The good person that she was kind of came through at the inquest too. That all of the people who met her, even though she was extremely unwell and in desperate need, once they had a chance to know who she was, they appreciated that she wasn't any of the things that lots of people who the people who have ME are stigmatised, and Maeve was one of the best ambassadors that people with ME could ever have, because she was just a good person.
We've heard in the inquest that none of the doctors had any training and therefore very little knowledge of ME. We've heard there are no specialist wards or specialist beds for people with ME, severe ME, anywhere in the country. We know there's a woeful lack of research. We need all those things addressed, and really, really urgently.
As she deteriorated in her final year, she was admitted to hospital 3 times, but wasn't kept in, despite difficulties feeding. The inquest heard doctors said there was no medical reason to detain her. Under COVID conditions, Maeve would have had to have stayed alone too. Instead, she was sent home to be cared for by her mother, who did her absolute best, but Maeve lost her ability to be fed.
That growing up into being a disabled adult was heartbreaking on the one hand and very stressful on the other, but the person that Maeve grew into as an adult was as outstanding as all of her academic work had ever been, and she was the best company that I've ever known. And I know parents love their children, but not every parent feels like that.
One doctor who submitted written evidence in the inquest described Maeve's situation as the NHS at its worst. Another independent doctor and expert in ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, wrote to the hospital demanding she should be force-fed through an intravenous tube to try to save her.
But sadly, 3 weeks later, she did die. My understanding is that the initial reason for deciding against total parenteral nutrition was that it was, brackets, too dangerous, which was slightly unusual, satirical in fact, in the context of someone who was dying.
Above all, the parents want to raise awareness that ME is not a psychological condition, but an illness that can occur following a virus, and clear treatment methods should be made readily available.
I still feel, I will always believe that it would have been possible to save Maeve's life. There are people elsewhere in the country being artificially fed who have severe ME.
Richard joins us again now. Richard, we've heard about whether more could have been done for Maeve. What changes have been put in place since she died?
Well, from what we've heard in evidence, doctors say that they do take patients with ME more seriously. This was an extreme case. It was their first patient with such extreme symptoms. They have had others come forward. And the parents are hoping that there is a culture of change now within the NHS locally that will look at these cases more carefully in future, but they hope that that message too on the ground here will be spread nationally to help patients up and down the country, many of whom they've heard of during this inquest itself. The coroner, though, says, of course, there is no actual cure for ME. There are methods that can be put in place, and she is hoping for change too, but it's not clear whether Maeve could have been saved in this instance.
OK, Richard Lawrence in Exeter, thanks very much.